Okay, we're just hours away from that deadline when the U.S. was supposed to impose those 25% tariffs on Canadian goods. But after his second call with U.S. President Donald Trump today, Prime Minister Justin Trudeau says Canada has secured a reprieve. In addition to its existing border plan, Trudeau says Canada is making new commitments to appoint a Fentanyl Czar. Canada will list cartels as terrorists, ensure 24/7 eyes on the border, launch a Canada-U.S. joint strike force to combat organized crime, fentanyl, and money laundering. Trudeau says proposed tariffs will be paused for at least 30 days while we, Canada and the United States, work together. So how did Canada get this reprieve and how can it make it permanent? Well, joining me now is the Minister of Public Safety, David McGuinty. David McGuinty, thanks for being here so soon after the breaking news. We appreciate you.
Thanks for having me.
Tell us how this happened. I mean, there was a 9 o'clock phone call, then a 3 o'clock follow-up roughly. Was there a demand put on the table and then it was responded to in the later conversation? How did it go today?
David, this has been in the works for weeks. We've been corresponding, working with our American counterparts. Melanie Joly, the Minister of Foreign Affairs, has been leading group after group, delegation after delegation. My colleague, Minister LeBlanc, I was in Washington last week meeting with the Border Czar and other officials from the White House and Congress. So we've been working on some of these elements for weeks. It came together, I think, at the right moment. We are obviously pleased to see this development, but we have more work to do.
What changed, though, or what transpired from the first call this morning to the second call this afternoon to then the public statement from the Prime Minister?
I think that it's fair to say that the President was apprised more directly with many facts around the work that we've actually done on the border. He's much more aware now of the investment we've made, how far we've come. These new elements are building on some of the things we've already begun. For example, this question of a joint North American strike force is something we've been negotiating for some time, bringing it forward. So I think what we've got now is a situation where we've got some work to do over the next 30 days to get this right. And, you know, the President expressed concerns, we listened, but we're working now jointly, hand in hand, especially when it comes to this scourge and this tragedy surrounding fentanyl.
I'm in no way trying to diminish the effort you put into the border plan, but do you think it might have been some of the business community backlash, the stock market hit in the United States, and even shows like the Today Show did like a 11, 12-minute segment today on tariffs, and it was seeping in, it seems, to the American consciousness that, uh-oh, this is going to cost us some cash.
That could be. I haven't been following it that carefully, David, if you forgive me. But look, it was all hands on deck. I want to say this. The premiers of this country, the provinces come together, the territories came together, businesses came together, everyday Canadians came together, I think in a real joint Team Canada approach. And I think this also helped get a message across to President Trump and his administration that Canadians were serious. Now we have 30 days to keep moving forward. We have progress to make. We're just, of course, content to see this happen right now, but there's work to be done.
Okay, I want to, if I can, Minister, go through some of the specific new measures that have been added here. Let's start with the Fentanyl Czar. Daniel Smith had floated a border czar. Sort of the reaction to that was, well, we've got a public safety minister, right? We have an RCMP commissioner. Explain to me the difference between a Fentanyl Czar and a border czar and how exactly this will work and
Sure.
Who's that going to be?
Look, we'll get into more details over time. We've got 30 days to put the flesh on that. But the fentanyl question, of course, transcends my department or any other agency or department. It really is a whole of Canada challenge. So the Fentanyl Czar will help us navigate through Health Canada, new regulations, new laboratories that we're standing up to trace and track fentanyl. Global Affairs Canada's got to be involved, of course, because it involves the precursors that are used to fabricate fentanyl that come from China and other sources. Our agencies of public safety are involved because it involves reaching out, for example, to folks in Mexico. So the Fentanyl Czar is really about following the fentanyl and finding out where it's coming from, what the sources are. And I think it's a very good, unique position inside the government to navigate through all of the players.
Do you see that as like a law enforcement type person,
or
a bureaucrat?
Coordinating role, but
yeah.
We'll get there. But I think it's more of a coordinating role. We have phenomenal folks in the front lines at the Canada Border Services Agency. The RCMP has done incredible work at breaking up 47 fentanyl labs, including the largest bust in Canadian history recently. 95,500,000 lethal doses, David. So huge progress has been made. We want to go further. We're very concerned. Look, this is an issue that transcends Canada and the United States. It's a global issue, but our societies are being deeply affected.
But this is a role, just so I'm clear, this is devoted exclusively to the issue of fentanyl. This won't deal with migration and migrants. It's not a border and immigration issue. It's strictly on...
That is correct.
Why narrow it to that and not do the broader border person?
Because we have so many good folks right now on the broader border issues. The RCMP, the CBSA, other players, provinces, provincial police forces are stepping up and helping out in this Team Canada effort. But the fentanyl issue is very, very important to us. It's very, very important to the new administration. And so I suspect it will, of course, bump up on some of the border issues we deal with, but the fentanyl crisis is one that we're deeply concerned about.
Okay, on fentanyl, Donald Trump's executive order said it was about fentanyl, and this is the pretense they used for invoking or threatening the tariffs using the emergency powers. In his reaction to this 30-day pause and the new $200 million plan, he ends his Truth Social post with, "I am very pleased with this initial outcome, and the tariffs announced on Saturday will be paused for a 30-day period to see whether or not a final economic deal with Canada can be structured. Fairness for all." And economic has a capital E. He's basically saying the 30 days, it's not about fentanyl, it's about an economic deal. How do you view this? This is the president saying this, because this sounds to me like he still wants to restructure trade flows, reduce the trade deficit, and fentanyl's part of it, but it's kind of the entry point for this larger agenda, and that's how he ends his post today. How do you react to that?
I think we're going to react to that the way we've reacted to this entire situation since it began, which is it's very important to manage our relationship with the United States well. And we've been doing it for decades. In fact, we've been doing it for 150 years. It's very important to make sure that that border remains the longest undefended border in the world. If this spills over into economic considerations, our U.S.-Canada Cabinet Committee will deal with it.
He's talking about bank access, though, like market access for banks. He's talking like it is much bigger than just one issue. He seems to have a laundry list of things he wants from Canada, and tariffs are his weapon to try to get it.
I am really confident, David, that we're going to manage our way forward on this. We always have, we will. And the fact that so many Canadians are behind this effort, provinces, premiers, police forces of local jurisdictions, so many different Canadians. You know, today in my constituency office, I had a couple of company owners call me in tears, worried about what was going on before this announcement. That's serious. A lot of families are worried. Jobs are at stake, the auto sector. So we're going to move forward. We're going to keep working forward together on this. We're going to remind our American colleagues, our neighbors, just how integrated we can be, how much success we've had together. I'm convinced we'll find a way forward.
It seems though like the goalpost can shift here, right? If he's already talking about the consideration in 30 days as an economic deal, you know, whether an economic deal with Canada can be structured in 30 days, it seems to be it's more than
Well, building on your analogy about goalposts, David, our job is to get the ball down the field.
Well, but Lucy pulls it away sometimes. You're trying to kick it, right?
And Lucy might, but then Lucy might bring them back. We're going to move forward. I'm confident we're going to be able to do this. We have a lot of work to do, and I do want to thank Canadians. I want to thank business leaders. I want to thank provinces for stepping up. This is a truly important moment, a turning point in our relationship with the United States, but we're going to find our way forward.
Okay, the Fentanyl Czar is a thing that is going to stand out. You are also agreeing to list cartels as terrorists. This question is in no way a defense of the cartels, but what is the justification for listing them as a terrorist entity? Because that has been a high bar in this country. There's been resistance to do it with Iran and other groups for a long time. Why a quick acceptance of that, and how do you justify it in law doing that to the cartels?
Not a quick acceptance, something that we've been considering for some time. You have to look at the nature of the activities of cartels and the similarities that they share with terrorist groups. So we took a long, hard look at what they're doing, how they're doing it, the scourge that they've become, how vicious they can be, and we've made a tough decision. And this decision is we've got to move forward and give our law enforcement folks more access to powers, extraordinary powers, not granted easily, because we want to nip this in its bud.
Like specific cartels? Will you name specific cartels?
We'll get there.
Okay.
We'll get there. This again in the next 30 days. We'll
but if you've been working on it for quite some time and it's not quick acceptance, there should be more details.
Well, there is, but we're going to wait until we have a better, more opportune moment to share more details.
24/7 eyes on the border.
Yeah.
Is that the drones, the Black Hawk, or
cameras,
is there more beyond?
A combination of factors: cameras, Black Hawks, drones. Stationary and non-stationary radar and tracking systems, Obviously, a lot of this is operational. Can't get into too much detail, but we're certainly going to have much better focus on the border and in between borders.
One of the things that's in here too.
Border crossings.
Border crossings, yes, sir. One of the things that in here too is a Canada-U.S. joint strike force to combat organized crime, fentanyl, and money laundering. This is something you've been talking about when you were in Washington.
Yes.
Is that RCMP, FBI? How does that work? Is it DEA? Is it how is this strike force going to be structured? How will it be operated, and who will lead it?
Almost all of those and more, because this has also a domestic component to it. The Joint Strike Force involves our provincial police forces, our police of local jurisdiction, our attorneys general, folks who are doing investigative work. This is about wrestling the scourge and the tragedy of fentanyl to the ground. It's also about getting to the money. We brought some changes already to FinTrack to bear just 2 weeks ago. I think we can do more on this front. I think so. What I could say is stay tuned.
The Prime Minister also said in his statement, there's a lot of stuff jammed into a single tweet here, Minister. A new intelligence directive on organized crime and fentanyl. We'll be backing it with $200 million. What can you tell us about this intelligence directive?
I can tell you that the relationship between Canada and the United States on security and intelligence is still strong. We share a lot of information. We'll be enhancing some of that information, some of that sharing, to deal precisely with the fentanyl crisis and a few other threats at the border.
Okay, will the details of this intelligence directive be revealed publicly?
As far as we can go, of course. Obviously, there are some limits to this, but we're well on the way now. We'll begin a lot of these negotiations as of tomorrow morning.
The sense, though, Minister, I know there is a pause here, largely because of efforts on the border and fentanyl, and I think many Canadians are relieved to see this. But Donald Trump's again talking about the 51st state. He's talking about an economic agenda here. The Prime Minister, in his meetings with the premiers on Saturday and with his briefings to the opposition leaders, made the point that the sense was nothing you do on the border is going to stop this. It's about a much larger sovereignty threat to Canada. Was that assessment wrong on Saturday, and now there's a reprieve with this, or do you still believe as a government that there is a existential push here by Donald Trump that threatens the independent decision-making of sovereignty of this country?
Look, on this question of the 51st state, I think we have to take President Trump's comments seriously, but I also think those comments are just not serious. I think we have to be vigilant, but we need to move forward with discipline and show progress as we have here, I think, in this plan going forward, as we have in the last several months of invested time. It's hard to divine what the president's saying some days, and that's fine. I think he's trying to meet the obligations he's promised his own people. Having been elected in a free and fair election, he's moving forward. So we're going to continue to manage that relationship, and we found in our outreach to Congress and in Washington, for example, as recently as last week on Friday for several hours, there's quite a receptive ear here, David. People are aware of this long-standing neighborly relationship. They know there's a win-win to be had. We're going to keep driving home that message as we implement these changes.
Some of the things you talk about on money laundering, for example, I know this was in the initial $1.3 billion border plan and had been proposed in a fall economic statement, I believe, to do that, but that's going to require legislative changes. So are you at a point now where you need to go back to the House of Commons to deal with some of these things? If you have 30 days, you can't keep promising changes to the law to deal with money laundering. You got to have changes to the law to deal with money laundering. So does the House of Commons need to come back to get this done?
Some of the changes that were brought to bear on the money laundering side were regulatory, so they did not require an act of Parliament or some kind of legislative change in that regard. We'll look at this very carefully and see where we stand. And I've said before, and I'll say it again, I think parliamentarians of good faith and goodwill, if they come together and put the interests of 41 million people ahead of their own parties, if we have to, I think we will.
Okay, so you got 30 days to get all this done. How worried are you that you will be back here close to the 30-day deadline with a whole new list of demands that have been put on the table? Because this has been fluid.
Can't focus on that, David, to be frequent, if I'm honest with you. I mean, I think we just have to keep moving forward, implement. This is, I think, a good next step, but we have work to do. Public Safety Minister David McGuinty, I appreciate your time. Thanks for being here today, sir. Appreciate it. Thank you.
Well, Canada has received a temporary 30-day reprieve from U.S. President Donald Trump's threatened 25% tariffs. It happened following a couple of phone calls between Prime Minister Justin Trudeau and the U.S. President. The Prime Minister shared on social media that on top of the $1.3 billion border security plan, Canada will now appoint a Fentanyl Czar, among other new commitments. President Trump celebrated the deal in a Truth Social post just moments ago. He wrote, "Canada has agreed to ensure we have a secure northern border and to finally end the deadly scourge of drugs like fentanyl that have been pouring into our country, killing hundreds of thousands of Americans while destroying their families and communities all across our country. As president, it is my responsibility to ensure the safety of all Americans, and I am doing just that. I am very pleased with this initial outcome, and the tariffs announced on Saturday will be paused for a 30-day period to see whether or not a final economic, with a capital E, deal with Canada can be structured. Fairness for all." Saskatchewan Premier Scott Moe joins us now. Premier, it's good to see you again. Thanks for being here today.
Great to see you, David.
Okay, we've just gotten word in the last hour from the Prime Minister that proposed tariffs will be paused for at least 30 days. Now that Canada's come forward with some additional measures on the border, including a Fentanyl Czar and listing cartels as terrorists. What's your reaction to this development?
This is positive, albeit only for 30 days. This is a significant change, and it's a positive change, I think, for not just each of us as Canadians, but for all of us in North America, as we have 30 more days to engage on how integrated our North American economy is and how beneficial that integration is to each of us, wherever we live, north or south of the 49th parallel.
So listing cartels as terrorists, 24/7 eyes on the border, launch a Canada-U.S. joint strike force to combat organized crime, fentanyl, and money laundering. And the Prime Minister says he's also signed a new intelligence directive on organized crime and fentanyl, and will be backing this with another $200 million. So this, on top of the border plan, is about $1.5 billion in response to the demands from the President. Do you think that's going to be enough? Because things do keep moving.
Well, I'm sure the conversation is going to evolve as we find our way through time. And as I have said many times, where there's priorities raised by our largest trading partner and President Trump, if they align with the priorities of Canadians and Canadian families, such as the removal of fentanyl from our communities, such as limiting and stopping illegal migrants coming into not only our continent, but the communities where we live, we should act on those. And credit to the Prime Minister, and credit to Dominic LeBlanc, who I know will be central to these conversations for, albeit a 30-day reprieve. It's better than we were an hour ago.
Well, I just wonder, it's a 30-day reprieve. Are we going to go through this in 30 days, do you wonder? I mean, the President signed the order saying it was about fentanyl and migrant trafficking, but he's been talking about banking access, trade deficits, natural resources. It does shift, Premier Moe.
There's going to be many conversations that will happen over the course of the next 30 days. The border security and the removal of the fentanyl, those are areas where we can agree. There will be other priorities in areas where we may not agree with President Trump or with what he might raise. I think what's important as we find our way through this 30 days is this is all heading towards some conversation around USMC and our trading relationship more broadly, is that myself as a subnational leader and other subnational leaders continue with the very ambitious engagement on with policymakers throughout the U.S., but in particular those that are close to President Trump, on the positives of the integrated North American economy that we have. It is positive for job growth, it's positive for investments, and it's positive for both Americans and Canadians. And we need to engage like we did 4 or 5 years ago when USMCA was signed under this president in his first term and Prime Minister Trudeau's administration.
I wonder, Premier, the conversation on Saturday in the First Minister's meeting, my understanding is the Prime Minister and his officials said to you and your colleagues that they don't really think this is about the border. They do feel this is more about an assault on Canadian sovereignty. I just wonder, how do you view that? Like, what do you think the President's end game is here, at least when it comes to the sovereignty of us as a country? Because he keeps talking about the 51st state and, bringing us in as part of the United States. I mean, those are fighting words, right? I just wonder what you think his end game is here.
Well, currently it seems to be about the border, because if we see another $200 million, a significant investment in addition to the 1.3, in addition to the investments that have been made by numerous provinces, including Saskatchewan, the appointment of a border czar that was called for by myself and Premier Smith in Alberta. Those are all positive things that I think not only the the president had called for. But Canadians, I think, will stand behind as well. And I know I certainly do on behalf of Saskatchewan residents. And so this is not a win forever, but 30 days without tariffs is, we should not underestimate the impact and the power of that. And it does provide myself and others more time to engage on what really does matter in the North American relationship, how we create that North American energy, food security, and general security.
You've got a lot of trade-exposed industries, right? Potash would have been hit by this. Your energy industry, agriculture, all of it. I mean, your key industrial sectors have to be breathing a big sigh of relief, at least with this 30-day pause.
I think North Americans would breathe a sigh of relief. We're actually the least trade exposed, or one of the least trade exposed provinces to the U.S. We have done made a significant effort and investment, criticized at times, to diversify our trade around the world. That being said, our largest and traditionally our most allied trading partner is the United States of America, and we want that to continue into the future. So I would say this afternoon is a positive step forward. And we're just going to have to try to line up as many of those as we can over the days, months, and years ahead, quite likely.
Premier Scott Moe, we're going to invite you back in 30 days, if not before, because who knows when it'll change that. So Saskatchewan Premier Scott Moe, thanks for being here, sir.
Thank you, David.
Okay, time to bring in the power panel to talk about all of this. Lisa Raitt is a former Conservative cabinet minister. Brad Levine is a former national campaign director for the NDP. Here with me in the studio, Vandana Cotter is a former advisor to Prime Minister Justin Trudeau, and Rob Russo is the Canada correspondent for The Economist. Rob, quite the headline. 7 hours before the deadline, there is a reprieve, though Donald Trump is saying on Truth Social that this will be paused for a 30-day period to see whether or not a final economic deal with Canada can be structured. Fairness for all. So,
but I thought it was all about fentanyl.
Well, it's economic deal with a capital E, according to this. So this is what I wonder. Like, okay, the fentanyl issue has been responded to. It seems to be about something much bigger than that.
It's a good day for Canada. I'd say it's a good day for both countries. What have we learned? We've learned that despite the fact that the Prime Minister put us in a very, very bad position by waiting as long as he did to resign, he went into this not with a weak hand. He went into it with no hand, really. Came out of it after the weekend with, I think he could claim a victory. I think both countries can claim a victory. A rather remarkable victory for the Prime Minister, given the weak hand that he had. So what happened? I think that the Trump administration was trying to make this into a fentanyl war, even though the president kept insisting that it was almost everything but fentanyl. And the Canadian government and the Canadian people seemed to take him at his word. The president did something that hasn't been done in Canada for a long, long time. We've been a very divided people for a while. He united Canadians, and he got a market brushback. And we even heard from Republicans. We heard from Chuck Grassley and other Republicans basically beginning to come out and saying, you've made a mistake. Yeah. I think everybody learned something. I don't think the lessons are over. I think the Prime Minister learned something too. You have to negotiate. You can't go in with your opening position and stick to it.
Yeah, but I think they've demonstrated that. I mean, they clearly moved on things, And Vandana, I appreciate the point that the internal Liberal dynamics put the government in a weak spot. But Claudia Sheinbaum has a brand new 6-year mandate. She got hit with this. Europe is being threatened with tariffs. Canada is being threatened with tariffs. South Africa is being threatened, and Colombia was threatened. It's just this is the way it's going to be with Trump, it seems. But there's a reprieve. I mean, what do you make of where we are right now?
I think it's again a breath of a sigh of relief.
Yeah.
I think this is going to be more than just this month. It's going to be over the next 4 years. I mean, there is some volatility. There's a different type of president who looks at different norms differently than we have in the past, and we have to be ready for that. Now, we've seen elements of this playbook under NAFTA, so there's things we can learn from, and there's things that are new. Like, I mean, this is a different type of Donald Trump. This is his second mandate, overwhelmingly voted for. So we have to learn from that. But it's a win for today. I don't think we should fully be excited yet, but I think we'd pay attention. So if it means I think we've answered the issues on fentanyl on the border. I also think while I do think I understand the idea that the Prime Minister left us at a certain point, but he gets to just negotiate. And I think the most important thing is not to antagonize this man. I know everyone wants to fight back, so let the candidates do that. They want to say that, they want to say the right things for their political people, that's fine. The Prime Minister knows that the best way is just to negotiate with him, not antagonize him and say hey, I know you need to win. How can we give you the win, but also protect our own interests?
Yeah, the leadership candidates are getting all kinds of international media interviews. I mean, there's a studio here with a big table. If any of you want to talk to the national public broadcaster, people want to be the Prime Minister of Canada, but that's just me. Lisa, your thoughts on this? I mean, it's a 30-day reprieve, but I have a feeling we're going to be back at this in 30 days because he's now saying it's about a fair economic deal. At the end of this.
Sort of Damocles.
Yeah.
It's like this sort of Damocles. It's going to be over our heads. 3 things I take away from this. Number 1, the President Trump, I think, was frustrated in his first term with how slowly things took to get to a final deal with Canada. And he just showed how to short circuit the entire operation. And now he wants his fair economic deal done a lot quicker than he did in his first term. The second thing that I learned from all of this is how little the Americans care about whether or not Canada's feelings were hurt about this. And quite frankly, we didn't rank or rate much coverage at all in the United States, in the newspapers, or even anyone coming to our support. So that's a wake-up call. And then the third thing, I think, domestically, if we lose this opportunity to figure out our own world in Canada on trade and on doing business going forward, then we will have missed an opportunity, but as well, we haven't learned a lesson. Right. And I'm going to go back to the one thing I always talk about all the time, because I'm not away from this point. I really do think Parliament should be sitting right now. And I think that this is a time for good speeches made by people from their communities talking about the impact of what tariffs would look like and why it's important that we do something to bolster our own country.
Yeah, Brad, I need to figure out what it is people want. I take Lisa's point that Parliament should be doing this, but the politicians in the opposition bench are saying Parliament needs to be recalled, but then it also needs to be immediately dissolved so we can have an election. So it's like Schrodinger's Commons, right? Are we going to go in there and do work and pass legislation, or go in there and vote non-confidence and have an election? I'm not sure what the play is, but it seems like it's not needed for at least 30 days based on this. We'll see, though. What are your thoughts on things?
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, no, I mean, I do share the opinion that we shouldn't be prorogued and that we shouldn't be in a Liberal leadership race. We knew that Trump was taking office at the end of January and that he was going to come after us fairly aggressively. So none of this should be a surprise. And we actually, the Liberals and Trudeau himself created, it just weakened the overall ability because while we did get a 30-day reprieve, to others' points, we didn't really have much of a hand here. We have a lame duck prime minister. Our parliament is not sitting. And even if we wanted to pass legislation that would provide supports for Canadians if tariffs were to be brought in, it's not sitting for another number of weeks. I think that the 30 days, I think this is all part of a larger plan. I don't think any of this is by accident on behalf of Trump. I think that I think it's compelling that this was part of the whole plan, waiting to the 11th hour to squeeze out as much as possible. I don't think it's about fentanyl. I think this is more about overall exercising authority that he has, and he certainly made a lot of our leaders sit up and figure out what does this man want, what does he need, and of course he kept changing his mind. He never really had one thing, as we said at the outset. For some of them it's about fentanyl, border security, but it's about a whole bunch of other things. What we instead of spending the time going, I hope he doesn't come back in 29 and a half days and do this again, we should be figuring out what is it that we can do as a country. And I think the unity has been quite promising. A lot of Canadians are coming together. There's a whole Buy Canada movement that's quite grassroots and starting up. But the idea of interprovincial trade could boost GDP, increase productivity, and lead to some real economic benefits. Diversifying our markets where we are reliant on the United States. Yeah. It's because of proximity. It makes abundant sense to be their good trading partner. But we've talked a lot about diversifying our trading capacities, and I think what we should be doing is harnessing some of the goodwill internally within the country to figure out what are some of the things that could make us less vulnerable. Because, David, 2 weeks down, 3 years and 50 weeks to go with this guy.
Oh, look, I know. It is 2 weeks of what? 208 weeks. That's what a presidency is, right? But look, Rob, like the internal trade, premiers have been talking about that forever. Then they never want to give up the things that affect them, and it never goes anywhere, and we'll see, though this could create some more urgency. I'm bringing Parliament back. The economists you talk to, and you work for The Economist, they say it's like 3 months, really, before it gets to the point that these tariffs, if implemented, would really, truly be aggressively felt throughout the broader economy.
I think they're already being felt. I think that the investment is already on the sideline.
But to the point where you would need a large-scale relief support measure of some kind, because you kind of need to see what it looks like before you come up with a plan to deal with it, right? So, what can you do in advance? Legislatively?
I think what they were planning to do were things like waive the waiting period for EI.
Yeah. Can you do that through regulation, though? Like, can the minister,
you can.
right? So you don't need Parliament for that.
You don't need You begin preparations to supply businesses with credit so that they don't seize up, businesses that lose contracts. You begin to do things like prepare the CRA and tell them you're going to have to take it easy on individuals and businesses. They're going to be late with their tax payments, unable to do
I get all that, but is that something that Parliament needs to be sitting for? It's like, is there an obvious thing I'm missing? Like, Lisa, I heard Lisa, you said cut taxes, right? Bring people in and tax relief and these sorts of things. I mean, would you do that this early in advance if you don't even know if you're going to get hit with the tariffs?
If you're asking Lisa.
Would you do it this early in advance?
I always think, look, it's always a good time for a tax cut, David.
I should have known that answer was coming before I asked it.
Wow, underhand pitch.
That, I don't know why you're so keen on not having them sitting when they should be sitting. That's the part
I'm not at all. No. Look, I am agnostic on this. If parliamentarians want to come back and come on shows like this and talk about their plans and these things, then fine. Canadian democracy can function, but like the legislature doesn't just show up to talk. It needs to be acting on something. So like, what is the legislative work that would be churning through? Like, what is it that is not being done that could be done, right? That's all I'm trying to understand, right?
Yeah, I think reconstituting the committees, both in the Senate and the House of Commons, in order to bring in expert advice as to what we should be doing going forward makes a lot of sense. I think that we can put people to good use. I think Canadians would feel a lot more comfortable knowing that their voices are being heard. I think it's good for the perception that we're all in it together. I think it's good to be able to deal with things that you don't anticipate coming up so that you're actually all sitting there. I mean, in 9/11, we came back right away to deal with what the eventualities were that we didn't know what was going to happen. And I understand what you're talking about in terms of opposition parties just taking them out as soon as they come in. But that is a risk for opposition parties to do that as well.
Yeah, and Rob's right. Like I was asking for clarity on that. Like, I was speaking to the Conservatives today. I said, so you want them to come back and pass your plan? I don't think Justin Trudeau is going to call back Parliament to pass Pierre Poilievre's plan. Maybe he'll surprise me. But I said, like, where are you on going with a confidence motion and these sorts of things if they do come back? And they said, well, you can infer from what we said. I was like, I'm not inferring anything, because if I infer from the Conservatives and get it wrong, I'm going to get called all kinds of things, right? So I just wonder, like, could Parliament come back if everybody is threatening to have a non-confidence vote and plunge it into an election? Is because no one's saying we're not going to do it.
Yes, I still think that there would be benefit to having the House of Commons and Parliament back. I think there is benefit from the Prime Minister being held to account and answering questions. Canadians want to hear from the Prime Minister. That being said, the Prime Minister, we probably benefited from the Prime Minister making a very rare, and I would say a very effective appearance. The Prime Minister hasn't always helped himself, particularly when it comes to President Trump. I think, I suspect, I don't know this for a fact, but part of the reason why there is this feeling about Canada and fentanyl, where 1% of the problem that they have with fentanyl, is because President Trump really loathes Justin Trudeau. And so I think there is an advantage to a low-profile Justin Trudeau on this. He's going to be gone in 35 days. 35 days from now, he's going to be gone. So, look, but I still think that there is benefit to having the people's representatives back in Ottawa.
So he's got one more tariff showdown left to go, right, in those 30 days. So, Vandana, sometimes I ask these questions about why Parliament should come back, to get people to make the argument, not because I have an opinion on it. So you've heard the arguments. The Prime Minister can be held to account. He can explain himself, what he's doing, what he's not doing. Committees can bring in experts and study this. And you can reassure the country that the government and its Parliament is functioning and dealing with this potential economic crisis. So why not bring it back to deal with all of those concerns?
I think from a machinery of government perspective, you don't need these things. The PM can speak. The Committee of Internal Trade met. There was a meeting already talking about internal trade. Some of those key pieces there.
Those are parliamentary committees, because those are all non-functional
sure.
now. Right?
I would say that, but from a political theater perspective, yes. There is benefits to having them. People come back. People want to hear representative talk. They want to hear people being held to account. That helps you in your ridings. It helps people maybe show that government is functioning, because that's what they see it as. Like, they don't know when you're in the ridings what you're actually doing, but they can tune into question period, then get clips on the news, right? So that's where I can see both sides of it. But the only thing I worry about is from the American perspective. If we're trying to look united and have a strong hand, are there going to be clips from the House of Commons that will not show us in a strong and positive position, right? That would make it harder to negotiate with them. So I do agree with what Rob said about like a lower media perception, and just show just focused on what the premiers are saying, what the Prime Minister is saying, but not be out every day, because if it does make us look weaker, I'm not sure if that helps.
Quickly, I gotta get Brad.
Sure. Can we all agree, though, that an international crisis is one of the few areas that allows an unpopular incumbent government after a decade to have some advantage over the opposition leaders who are shut out? Just look at what's happening in Ontario. Doug Ford is campaigning against Trump. He's not campaigning against the opposition leaders, and they are shut out of an election campaign. Yeah,
an Ontario foreign policy election is not something I thought I'd see. But, there's a perfect segue to a clip I wanted to play before I go to Brad, because this is what Manitoba Premier Wab Kinew was out today. And he was asked about what's going on here and how this deals with the point Rob raised about changing the national political conversation. Have a listen to the Manitoba Premier.
What I would say is there's a pretty clear ballot question for the federal election now, and that is who is best suited to stand up for Canada in the face of President Trump.
Brad, what do you think of that?
Well, I think we probably said the very same thing, and of course I'm a big fan of Premier Kinew, so I would agree. And I think we've said that before on this panel, that the next election is a federal election. I mean, if this Ontario election, which is currently underway now, it's all, or much of it, I should say, not all, much of it is consumed with, Doug Ford called this a year early, this provincial election. He's on American television. That, of course, is getting picked up by local news here, and people are basically watching their premier basically talk to Americans about the need for jobs. So there's a lot on the line there. Now, will we be, if the election is this spring, the federal election is this spring, which I am predicting that it will be this. There's no question that this 30-day reprieve doesn't take off this ongoing threat that Trump poses to Canada. It also, I think, the conversation has already started. Even if he said no tariffs, I'll take it all off and I'll find something else to distract myself with later. The conversation within this country has already started, right? You've seen Buy Canada. You see on my social media feeds, lots of people are saying, I'm not going to the States for my holidays this year. I'm going to buy Canadian products. We're going to spend money here. It's something Premier Kinew has also said, is spend your holiday time in this country and put your neighbors to work. I think that conversation is already, I think we should have a good discussion, because it's forced us to have this conversation over the last handful of weeks as to whether or not we want to stand up. What does that us getting up off of our heels look like? And how do we defend ourselves? And then how do we define ourselves? I mean, what you're seeing at these sporting events is somewhat fascinating. Canada's being sung louder, and there's a lot of people who are booing the Americans. That was not the case a short while ago. So something's happening that we haven't seen in quite some time. Maybe during the NAFTA '88 federal election, you'd have to go back to touch into this sovereignty, this national pride sentiment. So I think it's going to carry over for sure in the election. We'll have good conversation as to what does us standing up for ourselves look look like, and what should the next federal government take it on the economy as well as on non-economic matters as well.
So Lisa, to Rob's point earlier about, you know, a government down in the polls dealing with an existential threat like this, it sort of helps you pivot and reorient and maybe reset the political calculus. You know, if Justin Trudeau was sticking around, that'd be easier to capitalize on. But you've got this weird, diffuse situation where Chrystia Freeland and Mark Carney are on CNN and MSNBC and CNBC talking to the world about this. And, like, how does this reshuffle the political, you know, conversation at the federal level when you don't really know who the Liberal leader is going to be yet?
I don't think it does. And ironically, I mean, if Mr. Trudeau wanted to cement a legacy of really leading the country through this, albeit shortened period of time, difficult time, he would have the ability to walk into the House of Commons and give these speeches and be able to talk about the important things of Canadian unity and sovereignty and host meetings and continue to function as the Prime Minister between now and whenever it is somebody else takes over. And they're not availing them of those opportunities. So it's going to be a scramble each and every day for one of the candidates to find a way to get attention on them during their process, and the Prime Minister to try to make sure that he's moving the ball forward. You think it's over with fentanyl, I would see you and raise you defense. Like,
look,
that's next.
and capital E economic deal, Vangana, which is right there. But I mean, Premier Canoe says the ballot question will be who can deal with Trump. In this weird moment we are in, it is the Prime Minister with a brogue parliament and some of the top advisors running to replace him. I mean, how do you think, how does this moment affect how Canadians view the upcoming election, do you think?
I think definitely he's right. It changes the ballot box question. I think we're talking about affordability all this time, and people are going to talk about Trump and who's best in place to deal with him. So I see the ballot box shifting. That being said, I wouldn't be surprised if end of March we were in an election campaign when the House comes back from prorogation. So I do think that's not too far away. But I think we'll have to just keep an eye out. But I do think that's what Canadians are going to be evaluating for. I think things have changed. I will say, to Brad's point, I am seeing, like the early days of COVID, people are coming together, people across all political stripes. I think of even Doug Ford, EB, Fury, all different parties, all standing behind like the Prime Minister, showing a national united front. I think that's important. I hope that stays that way, but what I've learned from COVID too is that the longer people suffer,
it fractures.
It starts to fracture. So I hope we can capitalize on it. And the one of my really good friends said, we're so polarized these days. Only big things can bring us together. And he mentioned the sad thing, it's usually war. Now we are kind of in an economic war right now. Sure. Right? So I hope this works out. I think it can capitalize, but I think that can change the ballot.
I don't mean to be crass purely in electoral sense, but I'm curious. If over the course of these 30 days, Prime Minister Justin Trudeau resolves this and the tariff threat does go away, does that help Prime Minister Mark Carney, Chrystia Freeland, Karina Gould, whoever comes next? I mean, how does that
elevates the Liberal brand overall. Where people were tired of Liberal brand, they thought we're tired of ideas. While there's looking for a change election and they're looking for candidates for change, I do think anything the Prime Minister can do to elevate the brand overall and show gusto and show ideas and innovative ideas and remind people what the brand is about definitely can help any one of those candidates.
Rob, your thoughts on that?
I think Trudeau's departure has drained some of the toxicity from the Liberal brand. We're starting to see that in some polls. I also think that that Trump bringing the country together is evident. Anytime that you can hear a Manitoba premier selling the charms of Flim Flon in February to Canadians as a destination, divisions of the country are being healed.
Yeah. Lisa, just a quick last question to you. I mean, we saw Pierre Poilievre out today with his sort of response on things, and kind of his playbook in these moments is recall the legislature and pass my plan, and that will solve it. He's done that a couple of times, which is politics. But they have wanted to have a get rid of Trudeau, get rid of the carbon tax election. This is all just shaking everything up, and we're only 2 weeks into this. How do you think what kind of a recalibration does this force on the front-runner party right now?
Yeah, I think you're seeing it in real time. I think what they did do is they pivoted quite quickly into realizing and recognize that Canadians want to actually see a plan that would be implemented. The politics side of it, of course, is demanding that the legislature passes it. But the reality is he's throwing ideas out there, and we have seen we've seen Liberal candidates come forward and take from the Conservative platform in the past, and I'm sure that they'll try to take some of these going into the future. I'm not fussed by this ballot question about being who can work with Donald Trump, and I would say that in terms of the branding of the Liberals and the branding of Mr. Trudeau, I don't think Donald Trump wants to see Justin Trudeau have a win here. So I wouldn't be too quick to think that he's going to pull something off of a great magnitude.